So what's it going to look like? Who's going to manage it? And they realized the importance that conservation authorities have in this particular situation, because our boundaries are guided by water. We cross multiple municipal boundaries. So they took it to the conservation authorities to manage the program. So throughout Ontario, there is 19 source protection regions, and ours is only one. And they lumped different conservation authorities that made sense through a variety of parameters to create our region. And we're considered the Thames-Sydenham Source Protection Region. And it covers the 3 CAs, St. Clair, Lower Thames, and of course ourselves. Within our region, we have 8 First Nations, 3 CAs, 47 municipalities, 8 health units, probably way over 800,000 people by now. And within the 3 CAs, we have staff that are technical staff that help guide the program. So we work collaboratively within together as the 3 CAs. So the key players here are, we have our Source Protection Committee, which is a multi-stakeholder committee. And this is really made up of, it's broken up into thirds. So a third are municipal reps. A third is your environmental health, public, First Nation reps. And then a third is your agricultural, commercial, industrial, and small businesses. So together, they're the ones that develop the policies under the guidance of the province. And the support, this is where you play a role. You are considered the Source Protection Authority, and so is Lower Thames, and so is St. Clair, but we are considered the lead authority in this situation. And as part of your role is we help appoint the Source Protection Committee members into the committee and provide technical and administrative support for the committee. So when we're looking at the science piece, so we have our assessment reports, and this is where you'll find all of the science. So this has your, lays out where all of our municipal drinking water systems are. And I should highlight that this program is fully focused on municipal drinking water systems, not private systems. So this lays out all of those systems, all of the science behind those systems, the hydrogeology, modeling, et cetera, is all housed in the assessment reports. And without diving too deep, I think the takeaway from this slide is the green dot is your well. And this is, we have different areas where we get our drinking water, which you're probably well aware of. Groundwater through the aquifers and our surface waters. Most are Great Lakes. So this particular one, the green dot, is the well, so it's drawing the water from the ground and the aquifer. And then there's been these multiple delineations, and this is all based on time of travel. If an activity occurs on the landscape, like spreading manure, pesticides, fuel spill, all these variety of things, which I'll touch on a little later, it will take X amount of time to get to that drinking water system. So we have policies that are applied to each of these delineation zones. And when we're talking about our surface water intake, so the yellow dot is where the intake is drawing from that surface water. The red around would be an area where there's no spill response time. So more stringent policies would apply for those areas, and it goes further and further out. Next slide, please. So this slide, I always really like, I use this quite a bit. In our region, we have 22 groundwater municipal wells, and most of those are in Oxford and Perth County. And we have 6 intakes within our region that we have to manage and have policies attached to. Next slide, please. So these are the prescribed drinking water threats that the province put forth. Without diving too deep, there's 22 prescribed drinking water threats, and they touch on the agricultural industry, so manures, biosolids, so on and so forth, fertilizers, pesticides, liquid hydrocarbon pipelines, road salts, snow, we're talking about fuel, DNAPLs, which is dense non-aqueous phase liquids. It's a lot of chemicals, organic solvents, and so on. So all of these, we have policies within our plan that touch on all of these to ensure that they cease to become a threat to our drinking water. Next slide, please. So the plans, our source protection plans, this is where we house all of the policies. And this is where the Source Protection Committee in the early days developed a lot of these policies. but this is a living document. We're always changing it and amending it, as well as the assessment report as things change on the landscape and as different rules are put forward through the province. The Source Protection Committee, so I should mention it does contain policies that protect existing and future drinking waters. And our source protection committees were required. They've written a monitoring policy, and that's what I'm going to touch on a little bit later, is where our whole annual report kind of comes into play. And this really tells us, is the Clean Water Act working? Are these policies being effective to ensure that we have safe, clean drinking water? And our tools that we use through these policies is anywhere from education to prohibition. Prohibition is not one we want to do, but it is there for some future uses and some rare situations. So I put this, and I'm going to read it verbatim. These are the responsibilities. So for any municipal councillors, this is important to know. That the source protection plans require municipalities to implement policies to protect the source water for their drinking water systems. The Safe Drinking Water Act includes statutory standard of care, Section 19 of the Safe Drinking Water Act, for individuals with oversight responsibilities for municipal drinking water systems, which extend to municipal councillors. The statutory standard of care related to drinking water ensures that decision makers are practicing due diligence to protect public health when making decisions about their drinking water. Next, please. Okay, so I'm going to just jump into the annual report. It will go pretty quick, but again, if you have questions, please let me know. But this report is where all of the municipalities have dumped their information into one of our portals. And then we wrap it up and send it to the province for May 1st deadline. So this is a summary, I took kind of a highlight summary that is found within the municipal reports. So under the Clean Water Act, the Source Protection Authority shall annually prepare this progress report and submit it to the director and the Source Protection Committee. So we have taken it to the Source Protection Committee. It did go to the Lower Thames Source Protection Authority and St. Clair Authority last week, and it was passed. So you're the last piece before it gets passed along to the province on May 1st. Next slide, please. So we have to send 2 reports. One's the public facing report that will be put on the website, and the supplemental form, which is like kind of all the details that are found within the reporting for municipalities. Okay, so our policies that we currently have, Oxford County has their separate policies. They were more advanced before the Clean Water Act and Source Protection Program came to be. So they have their own policies. They have 80 policies within their plan. We have 94, like that's the rest of the Thames-Sydenham region. Next slide, please. So we're just going to touch on kind of what our progress is to date. And I'm only going to just highlight the implemented for the sake of time today. Those that are legally binding policies that address significant drinking water threats, 80% have been addressed to date. Slide, please.
Sorry, just the difference in policies, is it mostly to do with the area outside of Oxford using water intakes?
Sorry?
Is the difference in policy numbers, is it different? Is the difference between that the areas outside of Oxford use water intakes from lakes and they have different policies, or?
No, they like, why does Oxford County have their own separate policies?
Well, they only have 80 policies and you have 94. So I didn't know.
Yeah, there are some policies that they didn't feel they needed to have. Like it could have been, I don't have the policies in front of me, but there might be something like a land use that activity that just doesn't happen there that we need. And it could be because of the intakes. That could be one of those reasons. Yes. But I don't know definitively, but I could get back to you on that. For the non-legally binding, 85% have been addressed or implemented. For our moderate to low, which is we're talking about our like general education and outreach and the septic, discretionary septic inspections, 81% have been implemented. So these, again, it's not legally binding, but these are like, have regard for, we would encourage these policies to be addressed. Next slide, please. And our policies that are not directly associated with addressing specific drinking water threats, 69% have been implemented. And this number is lower just because it doesn't have to be done, but still it's high enough. We're happy with that number. Next slide, please. So our risk management plans, these plans are when we have an activity on the landscape that could be a threat within the designated, delineated boundaries of an intake or a wellhead. Our risk management officials will go out and work with those landowners or businesses and create a risk management plan so that that activity ceases to become a threat. So whether that's, don't apply your manure within this boundary, or if you have a fuel tank, make sure it's encapsulated in concrete. So if there's a spill, it's not going to leak into the ground and contaminate that drinking water. So last year, 14 new risk management plans were created. Since the plan took effect, 80 properties have been affected by this, and those properties could have multiple plans on one property. So as you see, the 162, that's the number of significant threats that have been managed through the source protection plan since it took effect in 2015. So it just highlights septic inspections. We have 249 septic systems located in 8 municipalities within our region, and they are managed. They're mandated to inspect every 5 years to make sure those septic tanks are up to code and not leaking or have not been, or if they need to be decommissioned, they are decommissioned. So most municipalities have completed the first round of inspections and are beginning to plan for the next round. Some are lagging a little bit behind, but they're getting on the bandwagon now. Many of these inspections are for the summer, and City of Stratford, they had highlighted one of their comments that they have this now established a mandatory program for their municipality. Next slide, please. Okay, when we're talking about our enumerated threats progress, overall, we've had 77%. So at the beginning of when this program started, there was 1,058 estimated significant drinking water threats on the landscape. A lot of this was desktop analysis. After the plan was approved, an additional 88 were approved. Once risk management officials went out on the landscape, they could either decide or they would find, oh, this isn't actually a threat on this property, or business changed hands and changed altogether. So 508 were deemed non-significant, and the significant drinking water threats addressed because policies have been implemented are 370, and 268 still need to be addressed. And the province really looks at these numbers. These numbers are important for them. So, and I should point out, this number is always a moving target. We're never going to get to zero because businesses are always changing. Lands are always changing, and province puts out new threats. So we have to go out and do risk management for those new threats. So we'll never get to zero, but we're in a good place.
Julie, how concerned should we be about the number of threats still to be addressed?
I don't think we should be that concerned. Like if our risk management officials were here, they would tell you like they are addressing them. But a lot of these could be through the risk management negotiations, so they haven't been finalized. So, and some are new that still have to be addressed. I mean, yeah.
Not because there's no plan in place to address them, or is that a separate issue?
There is a plan in place to address them. It's just it's municipalities maybe not doing it. We have one municipality that they still have all of their threats that they haven't addressed. So they're just hired staff in this past year. They had staff turnovers, and no one was designated as a risk management official. So they're just starting that work. So should you be concerned? Yeah, you could be in some situations. In others, it depends on the municipality and what the threat is, I suppose. But
Kind of a related question. When I look at the annual progress report, the one that is to be posted publicly, it points out that 23% of the source protection plans are currently in progress, and we've got 76% in place and fully implemented, which is good. Is there an expectation that those other ones that are currently in progress will get completed within a certain time frame?
they have to there's timelines for these.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. So they have to, there's first of all, there's a source protection committee. There was one municipality that was lagging. And the Source Protection Committee decided to put in an 8-year, they have to get it done within 8 years of the time the Source Protection Plan took effect in 2015, which means they have until the end of this year to come in compliance. So that was just to give them an extra push, like, we got to get this going, you need to do this work. But with risk management plans, there's timelines, and there's also timelines for going out and doing investigation to ensure there's compliance. So we're in compliance mode right now.
One more question that you just made, an interesting point, that there's a particular plan that has to be implemented by the end of this year. If it doesn't happen, is it our responsibility or the province's responsibility to do something about that?
I think that's a fantastic question, and it's one we've asked. There's no system in place to push the municipalities to do it. Yes, so we could, name the municipalities forward on a public forum. There's things that we can do to encourage them to push along, but there is no system or through the province to push it, and it's not the responsibility of this board.
Well, I would hope, though, that you would talk to a member of this board if it's one of the municipalities that they represent.
Yes, I certainly could.
I'll leave it at that.
Yes.
Anna, you have a question.
Yeah, thank you for recognizing me. Just the same questions I had, I think Sandy alluded to, but as an elected official and as it is my responsibility for the protection, how would we be notified if there aren't plans, or what does that process look like?
I'm looking to Jenna. I don't know if we've ever been in this situation.
Clarify, Anna, are you talking about policy implementation, or are you talking about certain threats and whether they've been addressed within your municipality?
Yeah, just the responsibility that we have to the protection. And so if something happens, how are we notified or alerted to the challenges out there?
I mean, I think in the context of policy implementation, you wouldn't be. Your liability as a counselor is really more to do with the problems at the water system itself, which, as you know, counselors can be found personally liable for. And I suppose if that leads to issues with implementation of policy, that could come back. I wouldn't say it's an issue within the City of London, because the city's water supply is coming from both Lake Huron and Lake Erie, which are outside of our source protection region. So the protection of those sources fall to other source protection regions and other municipalities. The city did have some backup supply wells, which were included in the source protection plan, and policies did apply, but you may know that those systems were recently decommissioned a couple of years ago. So there are no longer any municipal wells that the city is responsible for protecting. So I guess as a counselor in the City of London, you're somewhat off the hook. And I think, Julie, it's okay to name the municipalities where we have been having some challenges. The biggest one has been the municipality of Thames Centre. So they haven't implemented any of their risk management plan policies. So that's where a lot of the significant drinking water threats, the policy to protect and address those threats is through these risk management plans. So they have not yet implemented a single risk management plan. So we've been really working closely with their staff to try and get them moving on it. And I think I'm hopeful and optimistic that things are moving forward in that respect. And as Julie said, one of the challenges that we had was that the risk management plan policy that was in place in our source protection plans didn't have a timeline associated with it. So they weren't technically out of compliance because there wasn't a timeline associated. And so the Source Protection Committee has now moved to put a timeline in place for that policy and really push them to get those source protection plans in place. So we are trying to hold them accountable and get them moving on it. And I guess there was some delays within the county of Oxford too, and that was really a staffing challenge. They hired someone that was sort of the main implementer of a lot of their policies, and that person took 2 maternity leaves in the first 5 years that the plan took effect, and then has now left the county. So they've had some challenges with staff turnover and departures that has delayed them to some extent, but different challenges than we've experienced in the center.
Excellent. Is there any further questions? Yes. Bill.
Thank you, through the chair. When you look at future threats, scientifically, I remember reading 15 years ago, and I don't think we've ever touched on it, but it's just from our sewage treatment plants and the water solubility of all kinds of different materials. And that was very evident during COVID when you're actually taking samples, being able to trace back. So do you ever see any of that discussion and what the plans are for the future and how we're going to deal with all these?
Good question. I mean, sewage, there's policies that apply to that. That's directed through a prescribed instrument through the province. So we don't deal too much with that on our end. And this is the program. It's so like we touch every industry, and it's hard to be an expert in every industry. So I'm not sure what the ministry's plan will be with that.
Okay, thanks. That answers my question. I just wondered if there was any sort of updates, because I see it in the future as a real threat.
Yeah, the threat that we see that's emerging is biosolids on the landscape, untreated biosolids. So that is something that's being popped up more and more. Landowners are applying to the province to spread, like if they're in the porta potty business or whatever have you, or septic business, and they're applying to the province to be able to apply all that waste on the landscape, and it's untreated. So this is becoming something that's happening more, not in up here near London, but more down towards Chatham, Kent, Wellsburg area. So that's something that's being talked about, but.
Yes, Scott.
The chair, I'm just wondering, so London every now and then will dump untreated sewage into the Thames. Sorry, and then heads down to, is it St. Clair Lake? And then it goes into Lake Erie. But since it's not, I guess, like you showed us the bubbles that are around the source protection where we draw water from Lake Erie, since it doesn't show up exactly in those bubbles, even though it does go down and ends up in that lake, this doesn't address it at all?
Not at all. No, like our policies are only within those delineated areas by a wellhead or an intake. Anything in between, you would hope that there's different prescribed instruments, government bodies that will take care of that. But under the Clean Water Act, it's only those delineated areas.
And then a follow-up if I could. So I know that Oneida gets their drinking water from the Thames. And so when there are extreme weather events and raw sewage is being dumped into the Thames. And I know there's a new solution for their drinking water source, but I'm just wondering, so is that when that occurred, again, that was not in the bubble, like we're outside the bubble?
No, so back when this whole program was being developed, there was a lot of consultation with all the First Nation communities within our region. And those communities down there decided not to elevate their systems under the Clean Water Act. So there's no policies under our act that would help manage the activities around their systems to help protect it. But luckily, like you said, they're going to be now elevated. They're going to hook up to the Lake Huron pipeline in the near future, which is good news. Yeah.
That's one follow-up, if you know the answer. When you say elevated, I guess I don't know what that means, because they had my understanding was they had a water treatment facility. So that just wasn't captured in this.
At the time, they decided they wanted to manage it all within their own community. They did not want it to be under the bubble of Clean Water Act under the province. So they hire their own staff, they train their own staff, they manage it within their own community. Yeah. And we do have on the Source Protection Committee, we do have a rep from Oneida and Chippewa that sit on the committee. So it's really great because they're providing really invaluable feedback of what's going on there and how things could affect them and vice versa. Yeah.
Very quickly to help Jim with it, your question is, We had a very long discussion at the meeting about forever chemicals. The plastics that are already in the water systems. And are in the sewage as well. So there's emerging science on that as well as emerging legislation, particularly in the US. But the province is looking into it. So it may come up as a matter, but it also may be, we're just stuck with this stuff because it's already there in the water.
Yeah, we had a big discussion at our Source Protection Committee a couple of weeks ago about PFAS, which is a lot of those chemicals that are being caught in our water, and it's found to be in everything that we consume. So there was a lot of discussion, how do you manage that in our water? Like at our level, we can't manage that, but the province, the country is looking at it, the Americans are looking at it, so it is an emerging issue and it is being addressed, but a lot has to be done before things can move on that one.
I guess it'd be a water treatment issue. It's everywhere.
Well, yeah.
Excellent. Any further questions? Somebody online? I'll make sure I don't miss anyone. Don't see anyone. Okay.
We have 1 or 2 slides left.
Oh, excellent. Oh, yes, yes. Sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry to do this, but I'm gonna have to read this verbatim. So bear with me. This is the message from the Source Protection Committee so that everyone is aware. So December 31st, 2022 marks 7 years since our Source Protection Plan first took effect. In that time, significant progress has been made to implement the policies contained in the plan and address the activities that were identified as posing a risk to our municipal drinking water supplies. To date, 80% of the policies posing a risk to our drinking water, to date, 80% of the policies in the plan that address significant drinking water threats have been fully implemented, with the remaining 20% progressing well. An additional 14 risk management plans were established over the reporting period, bringing the region's total risk management plans to 80. Approximately 77% of the 1,058 originally identified significant drinking water threats, along with those identified after the originally approved source protection plans, have been successfully managed or eliminated. While there's still a considerable amount of work to do to address the remaining threats, the Thames-Sydenham Source Protection Committee is pleased to see that the policy implementation is moving steadily forward. For that reason, they believe that a ranking score progressing well and on target is a fair assessment on our implementation progress. For the reasons outlined above, the Source Protection Committee feels confident in their assessment that implementation of source protection plans is progressing well and on target. So that was what was in the report that was provided to you, is the progressing well. Next slide, please. So the last slide, staff recommend the following motion, that the Upper Thames Source Protection Authority approve the public facing report in supplemental form to be submitted to the Ministry of Environment and Conservation Parks by May 1st, 2023.
I'll move that, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. And a seconder, please, Jim. Discussion. Thank you very much, Julie. I think as development happens and we see provincial policy come into effect that challenges that, we'll have to be monitoring more and more on how that affects our drinking water sources and making sure that we're providing feedback to the province on those policies to make sure that we're doing our due diligence, and of course to remember municipalities, maybe Middlesex, sorry, Thames South, I will call them out, and please do your part to help make sure our drinking water is safe and those drinking water sources are protected. No further questions or comments. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Excellent. We do not have any reports for information, so I will call for adjournment of the Source Protection Authority meeting. Paul moved, and we are now adjourned. Excellent. And I will now call to order the April 25th, 2023 UTRCA April meeting at 10:05. As a reminder, Emily Chandler is serving as our meeting host. So if those online have connection problems or issues with technology, please contact Emily through the chat feature. Today's meeting is being live streamed on the UTRCA YouTube channel. Please refrain from whispers or side conversations while the meeting is running, as they could get picked up by the microphones. Just a reminder, when the squares glow red, the microphones are muted, and when they're green, as they are now, they are on. So we do have a regret from Harj. Everybody else pleased to be here, either through Zoom or in person. Am I correct in that, Michelle? Excellent.
I should mention, we did, Peter Cuddy and Anna Hopkins had to step out of meetings, so they are currently not here, but they will be
Excellent.
returning shortly.
I believe we still have quorum. We will continue. Let's get my territorial greeting here, which I may have lost my name. Thank you very much. We will begin with acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Attawadran, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Nuyapik peoples, who have longstanding relations to the land, water, and region of southwestern Ontario. Local First Nation communities of this area include Chippewa of the Thames First Nation, Oneida Nations of the Thames, Munsee Delaware Nation, and Delaware Nation at Moravian Town. In the region, there are 11 First Nation communities and a growing Indigenous urban population. We value the significant historical and contemporary contributions of local and regional First Nations and all the original people of Turtle Island. Number 2, modifications to the agenda. Are there any modifications that anybody would like to make to the agenda? Seeing none. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. We will now move to presentations and delegations. And I will ask Tracy to introduce Chris Tasker, please.
Sure, thank you. Through the chair. As we've done the last few meetings, we've had kind of an orientation overview of our programs and services. So with this month, I've asked Chris Tasker to provide an overview presentation of our water and information management presentation. This always ties nicely into the reports later on in this agenda package that deal with our water and erosion control infrastructure, or WECI applications. So again, just to provide that context and background of everything that we do related to water and information management. Pass things over to Chris.
If I could go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about our programs and services for the water and information management unit. Try and go over those quickly in around 20 slides or so, and hopefully get people thinking about what it is that we do. We'll talk a little bit about the people that are responsible for those activities. We've got some of our senior staff with us today, and how the unit is organized. But then we'll work through each of the 4 program areas and spend a few minutes on each of those. It all looks nice and neat and tidy when I throw up an org chart like this, where we've got those 4 programs. But if we go to the next slide, you'll see it's not nearly as tidy as that, because we're an integrated organization. There's lots of activity that goes on amongst the different units within the organization. We rely quite heavily on those interactions with the other units. And I'll talk about some of those when we get into each of those program areas. And from the title itself, the information management component of the unit that I'm speaking about today is a service cost center. It's a service that we provide to the rest of the organization. So again, a lot of back and forth and interaction between those units. If we go on to the next slide, please. So I'll start with the information management. I think most people understand the general concept there of what we're talking about. Computers are a very important part of our business. We use them as tools to get our work done, a very important part. And of course, the connectivity of those computers in and amongst ourselves here in the office, out to the internet, our website. So all of those important things are all part of how we get our business done. As mentioned before, it's a corporate service that we provide. And some of the corporate services that our organization provides are compartmentalized out with some of the other units, as we've done with the water and information management unit. We can go on to the next slide, please. Getting into the water and erosion control structures, I'll first point out that we touched on this in January, your orientation session. I'm not going to cover any of the ground that we covered at that point in time. Please refer back to those slides. You can see a list of some of the topics that we talked about there in the first sub bullets there. I would like to talk a little bit on this slide just about some of that interaction, get into a little bit more of the details. This particular work unit or program relies heavily on our flood forecasting and warning, the senior water resources engineers to provide direction on operating structures. Not shown in the org chart here. We also rely heavily on the lands facilities and conservation areas. The folks in the conservation area have on-call staff that undertake the operations at our 3 major dams. They also do routine maintenance checks on those dams. So you can see that that's a large number of people outside of our organization outside of our unit, which we're relying on. For operating Warren Mitchell, we rely on people in the municipality to actually do the on-site operations at the municipalities there. I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the recreational structures. The Integrated Watershed Management Unit, their staff provide expertise that's outside of what we have in our particular unit, reservoir water quality, the aquatic biology, those types of things, vegetation management. Those are just some examples of the things that are interrelated around the operation of our dams and reservoirs. I'd like to point out, in addition to the staff that are here. Dave Charles is at the back of the room, and he's a supervisor for this particular unit. And then those are the staff that report to him and help manage the ongoing projects, the routine maintenance, preventative maintenance, and the capital maintenance. Next slide, please. So I'm going to skip over this slide fairly quickly. It's a fairly in-depth subject, but I figured it was important to point out that operating flood control structures is something that's pretty important to what we do. They have a very, very significant impact on flow reductions during our flood events. I'm not going to describe or read the information on here. It's a busy chart, but it does show the water flowing into the reservoir in that light blue line that peaks up around 800 CMS. And in this particular event in 2021, our discharge was capped at somewhere under 400 CMS or just under that threshold, where some flood damages occur around the Lake Street and Windermere area downstream of the reservoir. We're able to do that by closing the gates down and holding more water in the reservoir. And then after the peak passes, release that. So you can see the pink line is above the blue line as we get into the recession as the lake level is coming back down. I know we didn't cover it enough to understand that in infinite detail. If you want to ask more questions, that's great. Maybe at the end though. But sorry. Can I wait till then? Okay. And I can come back if time permits. If we go on to the next slide then, please. So we've got flood control reservoirs. That was Fanshawe was the example that we were looking at there. Wildwood and Pittock are also flood control reservoirs. We also have flow augmentation reservoirs. Wildwood and Pittock dams are flow augmentation reservoirs. They're operated not only for flood control, not only for recreation, but also for flow augmentation. And what that means is we take water into storage in the spring when there's a surplus of water in the freshet and the rain, the wet season, basically. Want to use that term, take it into storage and release it slowly over the summer to augment flow downstream. Sorry, it's pretty small there, but take a look at some of the numbers. We're adding about a CMS and a half, cubic meter per second and a half of water into the flow in the Thames River downstream of London or at London. There's an additional amount of water that's discharged through the city systems and into the water there. And just in a typical dry summer down at Byron, we'll see around 8 CMS of water, 8 cubic meters per second flowing past that station. And prior to the dams, it was more like 4. So you can see the impact that flow augmentation has, whether it's the dams or the importing of water from the Great Lakes, releasing it through London, has a fairly significant impact on the flows downstream. What that does set up though is that the reservoirs fill up and then draw down. But even when they're at their summer level, we still maintain flood storage in there. And again, the picture in the bottom, the scale, I know it's kind of faint to be able to see it in this particular slide, but it leaves us about 30% of the storage still for flood control, even when it's at its maximum conservation level. And that's 30% of the total storage, and there's about 30% underneath the winter dead storage, as we refer to it. So it's a pretty significant amount of storage on a percentage of what we actually use. It's still available even in the summertime. Balancing and juggling the different purposes here is always a challenge. We can go to the next slide. The recreational dams, I mentioned specifically Orr and Mitchell on this particular side, but keep in mind Fanshawe, Wildwood, Pittock all have recreational activities around them that are built up on the reservoir, rely on the reservoir, and are impacted by reservoir levels during their seasons. But I'm using these as a simple example. They need to be drawn down in the fall to get ready for winter so that they're low and can discharge water through the spring without impacting flooding the upstream areas, basically. So we leave those dams low over through the spring and then bring them up to their summer water level after the spring freshet. And you can see the rule curve for Orr that we've showing in this particular example. As far as the operations go at our Thomas Orr Dam, it responds fairly quickly. Back in the 70s, I believe it was, they put in an automatic operations system. Mitchell, one of our plans there, they're currently being operated manually, but we want to move towards an automatic operation there. When we get these severe, intense, very quick moving summer rainfalls, it's very difficult to actually know that it's rained upstream of your dam, not at the dam, but upstream of the dam, and be able to get out there and respond to be able to operate it, to keep it below a safe level under those events. Automatic operation will really help with that. And you will probably see those in the years to come as we move forward with implementing automatic operations there. If we can go on to the next slide, please. So I've kind of painted this picture as we work through each of those challenges. We don't have a structure where we only have to worry about one of those challenges. All of the structures have all 3 of those benefits. But as they conflict at various times. It's different in different seasons. It's something that we continually need to be considering, continually needing to be reacting to, responding to. And an important part of this is education. Either through the parks or through our community education folks, is making people understand what these competing benefits are and how we're trying to balance those throughout the operating season. Move on to the next slide, please. So a couple slides here to talk about the Conservation Authority Act requirements. The new Conservation Authority Act. I see I made a change to the wrong version. But I wanted to point out that there's a couple things here that we have to do by the end of 2024. One of which is come up with infrastructure operational plans. We already have operational plans. We have OMS manuals, but they're not something that I can go and take out to the public and say, yeah, here it is. The Conservation Authorities Act does not require us to do that, but we feel fairly strongly that it's something that we're doing on behalf of the public. There's an interest in how we're operating that. So we want to take this opportunity to develop a public facing, straightforward, simple version of that operations plan that doesn't get into the the weeds about how to actually open the gates, when exactly that needs to be done, but cover the high level principles in that form. And if we go on to the next slide, the other requirement under the Conservation Authorities Act was that we develop an asset management plan for our flood flow augmentation and erosion control structures. We're stepping back and taking a bigger, more holistic approach to that and looking at it from an asset management across the organization. It's pretty important that all of this stuff fits together and not just consider our flood flow assets in developing. But of course, we have the regulatory requirement to do this by the end of 2024. Next slide, please. So flood forecasting and warning. Basic listing of what we do, the name kind of covers it. It covers a lot of it, forecasts that are forecasting the floods and providing warnings on it. But in order to do that, we have a hydrometric monitoring network. We maintain a database for all of that, and we make calls out for dam operations to those people that I've spoken about earlier. The people that are involved with this particular unit, I've got Mark Helston here with me today as well, and he supervises that particular unit. If we move on to the next slide, please. So what does that mean on a day-to-day basis? Mark and or his person that covers him, Mark Shiflett, would be doing on a daily basis, assessing the conditions and determining whether, hey, we're good, I can assess it again tomorrow, or hold on a second here, this is getting interesting, we need to elevate to something that's more of a 24/7 type of monitoring activity. Well, on to the next slide, we'll get into some of the details of how the communication goes on. So if we get into a situation where we're seeing it's looking like it's a potential for flood, we communicate with the municipalities and specifically the municipal flood coordinators using a bulletin type system. We follow a similar terminology, well, same terminology as all the other conservation authorities, but similar to what Environment Canada does with weather. So it's sort of a graduated system where we have condition statements. There's two types of those, both a water safety and a flood outlook, which basically it keeps the information flowing about what's coming up, what's to expect. We elevate to a flood watch, which provides a little bit more specific notice, and it's a time to wake up, time to pay very close attention to this. Some areas, some of the flood damage centers may have roads that they have to keep their eyes on. They may have to think about evacuating certain areas in some of the very flood prone area, closing trails, that sort of thing. And of course, the flood warning is when it's imminent or occurring. And we provide very specific information in that case to the areas where we would expect that sort of flooding situation. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So an older slide just shows that the flood damage centers are spread around the watershed. A lot of them are occurring in the highly or the more urbanized areas where a lot of the population has developed. But I will point out that second bullet, there's a lot of them distributed around the rural areas that are RV parks, trailer parks, that sort of thing, where they've moved the trailer a little closer to a river than may actually be advisable. And that's an increasing problem for the municipal coordinators as they're trying to get that, communicate that, those messages. As we communicate with the municipalities, they then have the responsibility of rolling that out to the individual residents, which I think is an important concept to understand. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So in order for us to do their forecasts, we rely on a hydrometric network. The number has changed from year to year. It's an old slide. I updated a couple of the numbers, but maybe the others may be a little bit out of date. But we rely quite heavily on some river level stations, flow monitoring stations that are operated by Environment and Climate Change Canada. I got to get the right acronyms because they change every once in a while. Or Water Survey of Canada, as we refer to them as. We have some at our five of them at our reservoirs that monitor the levels. We have a number of gauges throughout the watershed that are water levels in the rivers, and maintain those and convert those over to flows as well. Rain gauges are a very important feature here, as are snow courses, which I see didn't get added here, which we monitor the amount of water that's available or in the snowpack, and its ripeness, or its how close it is to being able to start releasing that water and creating runoff. It's in nearly real time. On an operational basis, we're pulling it and processing it to the web every 2 hours, but we can step it up and do that more frequently, and also call it that information. The next slide, please. All that information comes from those gauges, and it comes back into what we refer to as a time series database. A time series database is anything that can be plotted against time, basically, whether that would be water levels, precipitation, water quality, ecology, and those types of things can be incorporated into what we refer to as the whiskey system. And our whiskey system is one that we share with a lot of our neighboring conservation authorities. Got 11 members that participate together, conservation authorities that participate together with us in this hub. It's a service that we offer beyond our own services. We also include some of the City of London data in there, specifically some ecology and water quantity and water quality measurements that we're doing on behalf of the city. They have their own whiskey system, but it's not set up to do specifically that type of information, whereas ours has been developed specifically. Go on to the next slide, please. We also rely quite heavily on our forecast models. Those are hydrologic models. Mark keeps these primed and ready to go. Various models that are calibrated for certain types of situations. We can run the input, put the input into them, and it gives us an idea of what we can expect based on the forecast. And that's a pretty important thing. We know how precise and accurate weather forecasts are. I'm not exactly sure how to say that. We've got a few extra degrees of uncertainty in our forecast. We don't know what's going to happen in the weather. Weather forecasters give us a pretty good idea of that, but we then also have to figure out, well, how much of it is going to soak into the ground? How much of it is going to run off? How much of it is available in the snowpack to actually add to that? So there's a lot of other degrees of variability or uncertainty in the forecast that we have to then turn into a forecast to be able to provide information to the municipalities on what can happen. We've got a number of tools. The hydrologic models are one of them. We also use some spreadsheet models that we've developed for snow melt and also for operating the reservoirs. Next slide, please. I'll just skip over this with one minor comment that this is a slide that we throw in most of the ones we were talking, most of our presentations to municipal flood coordinators, pointing out that there seems to be a relative increase in the number of mid-season melts. This year was a good example of that. We had snowfall, then it disappeared. We had snowfall, then it disappeared. We were wondering, are we going to get more snow? All of a sudden we did, and we ended up with 75 millimeters of snowpack and basically landed almost ripe and ready to run off with a forecast of rain in a couple weeks time, and then more rain, and then more rain, and then more rain. So, you know, each year is unique and different. That's all I've really say on that particular slide. Move on to the next one, please. So we've got a number of different scenarios which can set us up in a situation with flooding. I've mentioned rain on snow melt. Ice jams are another one. Thankfully, it's not a big challenge for us here in the Upper Thames. It is for many of our colleagues working in the conservation authorities nearby. You can see a picture of the St. Clair River and the situations down in Wallaceburg. That's an annual problem down the lower Thames at the mouth. Also, the Grand River has a number of places where ice jamming has historically been a challenge. We have some areas, but they're floodplain areas. They're not areas which have been developed. They're not areas where there's flood damage centers, basically. Not to say that it couldn't happen. We're required to do an ice management plan if we say it's necessary. We don't necessarily think that it's necessary, but I would rather have an ice management plan, which basically outlines the history of ice and ice flooding, the limited history of ice jam flooding, and says that here's our plan, should it happen. And really, it's back to our flood forecasting and warning plan. We will do, as we do with all of our other flooding, provide that information to the municipalities on forecasts and through their municipal flood coordinators. And then that's a response becomes a municipal responsibility. So we do intend to put one of these together by the end of next year, but it'll be very, very basic. Just as a really quick description of that. Can I go on to the next slide, please? And that leaves us with the last of those four groups, the hazard mapping and modeling group, or technical services, as we're kind of the province refers to this part of our business. They're involved with developing models for many purposes. Right now, the big focus is on that is on as a tool to be able to develop regulatory mapping for a regulatory program. Move on to the next slide, please. So up to date, most of our focus has been on collecting the data, pulling that together, doing the cross sections, doing the work on the model, getting the input, putting it all together. We've got more than 40 study areas on the go at various stages. Everybody's always interested, most importantly on, area A, but we've got 40 of those that we're working on at the same time. So it's constantly evolving priorities. Is one of the biggest challenges there. But we've got those, getting those to the point where they can go out and be peer reviewed. We go on to the next stage. So one of our important things is we've done all the work to bring all this information together, all of the inputs, develop the models, but we want to make sure that they're technically sound. So peer review is the next focus on that. And at that same time, taking those some of those results and talking to the municipalities will be a focus in the months to come, basically. A subsequent focus after we get through that stage will be broader public consultation, and that's where we rely quite heavily on our communications folks to help us to get that message out, and we'll be working on that in the months and years to come as well. Then once we get through that process, these are important tools that we can use for other purposes, flood zones and thresholds, looking at flows beyond just the regulatory flow, nuisance type flooding, right up to the very severe, even higher floods than the regulatory flood, to be able to categorize and be able to provide more information on what municipalities can expect in our bulletins. We'll move on to the next slide, please. And that gets me through to the end. And I did see that there was at least one question.
We will start with Skylar.
We have 6 now.
I know.
Yeah, maybe I'll do one and then I'll let the chair.
Well, no, absolutely. Just work your way through. You may answer other people's questions now.
All right. So, and you might want to flip back to some slides because I have some specific.
You do that, Emily?
The first one was the flow.
That graph.
Yeah.
Engineers love our graphs.
That one. So one of my questions was, how do you decide the maximum that you'll store? Because I'm just wondering, when we do have extreme weather events in London, when we do get flooding, in Adelaide, like, could you keep more back, or are you like, no, we're at capacity? Because if you keep more, it'll flood somewhere upstream.
So we always have to have an eye on what our capacity is in actual storage. If we take too much water into storage, we can fill the reservoir and be stuck and have to release more than we wanted to. So it's always a balancing act. The dams, when they were built, relied quite heavily on pretty hard and fast rule curves, rate of rise, reservoirs at this elevation, therefore the gate should be at this elevation. We have a lot better information than that now. We always refer back to that, those rules basically, but quite often we can find that we can do better than what those would be. In this particular case, you know, we were able to keep it under that threshold because we had information on what to expect coming in, and then what that would do to the reservoir level, and what the forecast looked like as far as more rain coming or not afterwards, those types of things. So there's a lot of things to consider.
Yeah.
Mark, did you want to add anything to that, or?
I would just say for that particular one, that that Adelaide Street flooding, we were very conscious. That's our kind of first big threshold. And there's not really too much of consequence that happens below that. So if we know that we have a pretty major flood event coming, like this September was I don't remember, like almost 4 inches, 100 millimeters of rain in over a couple of days, I think. And if we know that that's coming, we would probably pick that threshold right away and then kind of reevaluate if that was enough or if we needed more. Now, in this case, you can see on the other axis that the elevation of the reservoir went up to just over 5 meters, and there's still another few meters to go at that point. So we could have done better there, but there really wouldn't be that much at gain by doing that.
And then you're adding extra risk.
Well, there could be another event too. You could then have another event happen where your reservoir is full. That's unlikely, but we do have to, that's another consideration.
And I would point out that this is September. So the other factor that we had to consider is there would have been a bunch of trailers that had to move.
Oh, right.
Right. So 5 meters, what did we get up to? 5 meters of
Yeah, they got to be moved at 2 meters.
A part of in a shop campground underwater. Yeah. And all of the boats, the yacht club has boat moorings and all that sort of thing. So obviously that stuff has to move, make way for the water. But there's a balancing act.
As we've gone through more of these events, I think too, we're getting a better understanding of how it behaves, I think, and what's realistic. And I know I feel like when I first started this job forever ago that we didn't have as much experience because there just weren't as many events.
What I'll add to that too is that I think we forget how far we've come with technology
Yes.
in the last, at least even 20 years. And so real-time data coming in is being able to give you guys, because you probably would have had someone at one point at Adelaide Street. It was more of a guessing game of, because you had your hard and fast numbers, but you don't know how it reacts. You're seeing, like you're saying, almost real live data come in, and being able to use that. So as technology gets better and better, I think we'll see even better operations of the dam. And
We used to have a thing that beeped at us. Call it up and it typically lifted the phone off in the remote location and it would beep like 1, 2. It meant it would give you a number that would give the elevation based on beeps. And I'm old enough that that was still working when I started.
It's not just this, it's across all levels of government and even municipal government, is that whether it's planning or anything like that. Right now we can call it a planning application, but I just asked for one that happened to be from 2002 and it's like, that's paper form still. It's going to be a week before we can get that. So we just live in such a great world and we forget, and sometimes we take for granted all the information that we gather now. And so it's great to see all this stuff happen and make sure that going forward, it's going to be more real life data for you guys to use to be able to operate it safely and limit those flooding events. Absolutely.
So I imagine kind of this is, what is it, an art, it's a science, but it's also an art. And I'm wondering with more extreme weather events, and then as we pave more and more of Southwestern Ontario, like, is it always going to be, you're kind of like, yeah, like, you know, you can base it on what you did last year. And, you know, last year, let's say you had a 70 millimeter rain event and this is what you did, but then it might always will it always be changing, I guess, because what you did last year might not work based on what's happened in the year.
History tells us a lot, and being able to compare events to previous events is a very, very important part. There are different characteristics of the event, so some are going to fit, not all of them are going to fit, right? But it's still very valuable information. It's important to understand what may have changed since then. And on a Fanshawe scale, development isn't that big of an issue, but on a Dingman Creek scale, it's huge, right? Because it's just the percentage of land that's changing so rapidly is a lot different. On the watershed scale upstream of Fanshawe, deforestation, that stuff's behind us, agricultural drainage, all of these other things that, affect how much water runs off basically based on an amount of rain. And I haven't even mentioned climate change yet, right? But we know it's there.
We can tell on the graphs, like the stuff where, especially the dots where it was like coming closer and it's like starting to shift into January.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say too, Chris, just quickly, almost more than the pavement or paving of the upstream of Fanshawe, like you say, it's not that significant, but the thing that's changing is the timing. And if you get, and we had it in January of 2020, like a 100 mm rain event on basically frozen or completely saturated ground, that's very different than getting that same event in September, which we had in September and we were able to easily manage. So, and that seems to be something that's happening more and more. So I think that's probably our biggest risk, actually.
Vegetation cover, the condition of the soil, how, like, there's all sorts of those variables that change.
Worst case scenario in January, basically.
January, frozen ground, no snowpack to absorb it. Yeah.
Well, and I can even tell on a micro scale, like in the past month when we had the extreme weather event, residents in my ward, there's a certain area that has a lot of underground water, and a neighbor, they had been, fine. Next door neighbor put in a pool in the backyard. The whole backyard was paved. The following year, that neighbor, full backyard flooded, full basement flooded. So it's like, I can see the microcosm, and I just imagine you guys dealing with that like a huge scale. So anyway.
And the intense summer rainfalls become really, really important when you start getting down to the local scale, right? A little bit of rain in a small area doesn't make that much of a difference when it comes down to Fanshawe, but it sure makes a difference in that area that it fell.
A couple more. But you can tell me.
I don't see anybody else, so please continue. We're gonna have one more for you, and then we're gonna.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. Now they're being. Go ahead.
Okay, a couple years ago, I watched a movie, and I don't know if you guys have seen a documentary called Damnation. It's all about in the United States, all these rivers that are dammed, and then they're starting to undam them. I know in London, we, for various reasons, let go of the Springbank Dam, which is a recreational one. And it has improved a lot of the ecological value of the river. So I'm wondering, I noticed we had a couple recreational dams in the portfolio. Have those been discussed about retaining them or future plans?
In a general term, yes, we've talked about that, not specifically about Thomas Orr, but the channel downstream, there's a weir that creates a backwater that was discussed recently. We talked earlier about Embro, some of the smaller dams that we have in the small conservation areas. In my opinion, fall into that category. There are things that we can do there to try and naturalize those systems. It's again a balancing act, as anybody that watched the situation down at Springbank can see, right? It's a tough balancing act between the local priorities and the benefits that they've derived from having it and the impacts that it's been causing historically on the natural flow and all that sort of thing. Is that good enough non-answer for you?
Yeah, board discussion I'd like to entertain later, but that is a good background.
We watched that film actually, like a lunch and learn kind of thing years back.
Just two questions. You mentioned early in the presentation something about dead flooding storage, so 30% level. Is there the downside of dropping that even further?
So it's, the downside is actually, we've made efforts over time to actually increase that. Number one, it doesn't really get used anyways. It's filled with that first bit of runoff. It's not, it's hard to actively use that, but the downside is that it's habitat, right? If you drain it down, there's no room left for the fishery that's developed there. And that's my simple analysis of it, but I think our fisheries biologists would probably agree with that sort of thing. And there's probably other things that would happen if you drain it, pulled the plug completely on it and drained it right down to zero, which was kind of the datum on that plot. So that's the balancing act that we're playing. And we actually went through a study back in 91 to look at the impacts of keeping a little bit more water in there over the winter for the benefit of those the fishery that's developed in the reservoir.
Yeah, it does. Some people seem to be under the impression that we keep it up in the summer for recreation reasons, but if we were to drop it even further, it would have negative impacts downstream, such as potentially flooding Chatham Kent. Okay. You mentioned also that we're working on 40 some odd mapping exercises.
Study areas was
Study areas,
used, yeah.
some of which is mapping, if I understand it.
Our focus right now is on the modeling, but that then translates into mapping, yes.
Yeah, and I guess where I'm going is, how are you prioritizing those? Because certainly there's a lot of discussion in London about certain areas, and there's needs in outside of London areas. So how are you prioritizing?
Constantly changing priorities is the challenge. Instead of being able to focus on one area, you're asked for information on another area, and your efforts get diverted and then come back to it. So it's basically trying to address the priority of the day. Day is probably an over exaggeration, but that's the kind of the concept and the challenge that we face.
And I guess whose voice gets heard the loudest in that?
Right.
And you're not saying whose.
Well, it depends on the time. It depends on the pressures. It depends on what the situation is. It's a balancing act, and it is also a timing impact as well.
I think what I'm hearing is that everybody would like the modeling to be 100% completed and up to date, but unfortunately, there's just so many resources to
In
do.
100% of the areas, then you're stuck trying to put out fires isn't the right term, but focus on those priorities as they come up, and then but still trying to keep that yardstick moving forward. So that has been a very, very significant challenge.
Thank you.
Jim, just have a question.
Yeah, thank you through the chair. So I'm gonna go back onto this 30% storage that you mentioned. You also talked about spring, but I didn't hear a date. Yeah, I did put up that one graph showing Wildwood, which I quite like during flood events, is getting online and seeing the real data, and you can actually see what's happening. But I'm not sure if I'm reading the graph right that I looked at, but I think it was similar to what you had up there. So we're at the end of February and the most recent event. But I don't think there was 30% storage at Wildwood. I think it was pretty well up to the. I could be wrong when I look the way, see, I'm reading that up there at
That particular plot was not this year.
Yeah, but it was pretty similar. I think I looked at the one this year, but is that what it tells me, that it's at the maximum?
It is this year, yeah. Sorry, what was the question?
When I looked there at the end of February, we still got frozen ground, a foot of snow on the ground. I don't think there's 30% storage there at the end of February. Is there?
There is.
Is there?
Like above the green line? Yeah, thanks. That's
It would have been a little bit less,
above this green,
as the peaks were.
above this green line.
Yeah.
There's 30% of the storage up to the red line, which is the maximum.
It's up to the red line.
So we still have flood storage above the summer conservation level. That's what I'm referring to by an additional 30% of storage. Storage volume, right? Not.
I can't read on the graph, but what, on the left-hand column that says meters?
Yeah.
What is that?
Sorry, on
The left,
on the left-hand side,
Yeah.
that is percentage of the plot that I pulled up here is percent of storage to be able to
percent of storage.
illustrate the fact that there's a lot of storage left there. If we put meters on it, like we have that graph is also available on the
I
website.
think that's the one.
It looks like it's a linear scale, but it's not, right? Because there's more storage in the upper part of the reservoir. The bathtub is bigger, basically, right? Like it's wider and it's a lot longer at the upper part than it is at the lower part. So you have more surface area at the higher levels. Therefore, you have more storage available per centimeter of rise at the higher levels.
Okay, so but with that extra rise, does the reservoir still hold back the water or does it go over the baffles?
Yeah, okay, so now we're getting into the details on the particular.
So it doesn't really, because it's not acting as a reservoir anymore.
It is still acting as a reservoir. As it gets up to 6.5 meters, there's spill over the baffle walls. And as it goes up, that gives us automatic increased discharge as the reservoir rises. So it provides relief without us having to open gates to do the same thing.
Yeah, and I understand that, but if it was much lower, it would give you more time for these events, which would ultimately help the downstream, but I understand it's a juggling act. I mean,
It would if it was only for flood control. But it's not only for flood control, it's for flow augmentation. So we have to get it full to be able to have that water stored, to be able to release it to augment flow downstream. We need to get it up to here to be able to provide that water downstream as we're releasing it. Balancing act. And we've got recreational facilities that have been developed around that. We go when we move it, the yacht club, all the other stuff has to go and move all of their infrastructure down lower to be able to use it. If we were to run that, but you're being pulled in 3 or 4 different directions.
and I understand exactly what it is you're saying, but that flow augmentation probably doesn't start until June.
It started last week. And then we got some rain.
Because you're always getting, because you're always putting.
We're letting our minimum amount of release go and the level's dropping. So that means we're at it.
I think that's exactly correct. Yeah.
But now we're in a situation where it's full again. And we've got, 20 millimeters, 30 millimeters of rain forecast. So
Yeah,
this is a really tough, difficult time of the year to manage that reservoir.
Mark, please.
Yeah, I guess my question is that for example, the Piddock Reservoir in Woodstock was opened in 1967, I believe. Is it gradually filling up with sediment? Therefore, is your basin actually maybe getting smaller as time goes on, the volume of water you can carry in there?
Any of the reservoirs stop the sediment that's moving through, right? That's one of the negative aspects of creating an impoundment is it's going to hold sediment. So the simple answer to your question is, yeah, it's filling up. But let's go back to that dead storage that I was referring to. That's that bottom part that's filling up. It's not changing the amount of storage that we have for flow augmentation or the amount of storage that we have available for flood control on those reservoirs. Where you see that though, is you see that in the small reservoirs, the Embrose, the Centervilles, where it's now you've got emergent vegetation growing year round and it used to be because the sediment's built up to that level that stuff is in the water that's not good.
Would ever get to the point of the main 3 dams that you have to go in and dredge them and clean them out a little bit?
I can't see it. But not in our lifetime. But more important probably to that is the water quality impacts that sediment has on it, and that's something that I will leave for others to talk about. The nutrients, the phosphorus and the nitrate that sediment holds in the bottom.
Wonder if the low level valve though at Piddock, if it's low enough that it would actually be possibly affected at some point.
Yeah. There might be a possibility from an operational perspective that right down near the dam, that there might have to be some dredging happen. That's a good point. But on a reservoir storage basis, I'm not worried about that. Thanks, Mark.
Dean, please.
Thank you, Chair. Chris, you had, towards the end of your presentation, you had a slide about, I think it was monitoring flow. I was thinking in terms of that information, like your maximum flow through the gauge stations throughout the network, how readily is that information shared with municipalities, in particular, the design engineers that are hired, like for a culvert replacement or a bridge replacement, like they've got to consider the maximum opening of the structure and scour protection for the foundation and so forth.
So our focus on that data is for real-time availability for our operational needs. Water Survey of Canada, Environment Climate Change Canada, ECC, they manage the gauge network where historical data is really important. And so they do that to a very high level. There's quality control that goes into it. We would still make our data available under the premise that, you know, we do corrections, we compare it to the Environment Canada sites, we do that sort of things, but we do not maintain it. We maintain it for our purposes, not for that statistical purpose.
And we have some sites that Environment Canada has nothing to do with as well. And so those ones were the only people that keep that data. And if they asked us for it, sure, we would give it up, but.
Wabano Creek, a small water course, might get asked for data on that because we now maintain that station. There was a historical water survey station there, but we would provide it, but having a discussion with the engineer to say, there's a bit more uncertainty in this than there is in the Environment Canada.
And those municipal engineers have a whole host of their own tools they use to calculate that kind of stuff. Like there's Ministry of Transportation puts out tables, and there's a lot of sources of statistical data that they use for that.
Excellent. Skylar, did you have?
Two quick ones, maybe. Do any of our dams generate hydroelectricity?
Yes, we have a generator here at Fan Shop, half a megawatt.
Do you sell it to the grid?
Haven't been for a while. We're having some problems with it, but yes, we do. We use it when it's operating. We use it here internally first, and then what's left gets sold to the grid at a much lower rate than we pay for our hydro.
Maybe again, this might be a board one, but is there a possibility to discuss like increasing how much hydroelectricity we generate, or looking at, again, if we're replacing? This is like probably less of a you question.
It's been looked at multiple times to see whether there's capacity at the other dams. One of the challenges at Mitchell and Orr are too small probably for it to be even worth discussing. But at Wildwood and Piddock, the challenges there are the head. So in order to generate power, you need two things. You need a flow, and you also need head difference, right? The water difference between upstream and downstream, basically. And the challenge there is flow augmentation. If we kept it full all the time, then we could be able to generate more power, but we would be able to augment flows downstream. So now you've just added a fourth managing those. Yeah, exactly.
Tracy, do you really have anything to add?
No, I think Chris covered it well. Yes, there has been that same discussion at previous boards, probably quite some time ago now, but the challenges that Chris just mentioned, it's not necessarily feasible on our structures.
Always open to talking about it, but it's not hasn't been determined feasible to date. That's kind of the way.
Is that just from cost benefit, do you think? Because I'm sure that the engineers could come up with a way of having generating electricity. Don't know.
Things change, right?
Too many variables in the differential equation calculation.
They looked at it at Springbank too.
Yes, they did.
So any further questions? Okay,
Yeah, promise. I know at the very end, you did mention that you're going through the hazard mapping and you mentioned peer review. And I'm just wondering, is a peer review process a common process when you're doing the hazard mapping? Like, do you do that every time you do it? And who are the peers?
So we're working through that process right now. The process that we've developed is to have 3 peers. One that has a foundation in the consulting industry, one that's got a foundation in the more academic field, and one that has a more of an implementation or a policy perspective, a conservation authority type perspective. So that's kind of that's how we're approaching that. There's no one set way to be able to do that. That's for the flood part of the hazard. We also have the erosion part of the hazard, which is a different process and specialty and different peer process that we'll go through for that.
excellent. Any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Chris, for your team and for the presentation. Thank you greatly. It's obviously a very important part of the UTRCA business. And one of the most important things that we can do is make sure that we keep people safe. And as you saw, it was certainly, it's not an easy task. It's amazing how much a beautiful lake is actually an engineered structure. But then it's also an art to be able to make sure that that's operated. So we thank you very much for that and all the care that you guys take into that. And last, for a mover that the board of directors received the presentation for information. Tyler, seconder, George. Discussion. I'll say is all these programs here are clearly category 1 programs, and so they are up for mandatory levy, which I think we can all agree with. They provide a valuable service, make sure that our municipalities are safe. We're monitoring the challenges ahead, and basically the original mandate of the Conservation Authority, which has changed much over the years, but certainly a core item of the organization, the authority to make sure that we manage those flows. And I thank all the staff for their tasks in that. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. We're now going to move down to the administrative business. Get through that fairly quickly. Item 5.1, approval of minutes of the previous meeting. Moved by Sandy, seconded by Mark. Discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Sorry, I forgot to mention, I will note that the page numbering has been added to the agenda package in response to requests made last meeting. The numbers are shown on the bottom center of the pages. So hopefully that helps everyone. If it doesn't, please provide feedback to Tracy and Michelle and make sure that that's of the liking. Thank you, staff, for that. 5.3, we will go to correspondence. There is none. 6 reports for consideration. 6.1, 2023 water and erosion control structure WECI projects. Is there any questions for staff on that report or any highlights that report staff would like to make? Okay, moved. Recommendation is moved by Sandy, seconded by George. Discussion on those. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. The thing I will say is that is a great example of how the authority partners with municipalities to help save money and get those structures, maintain those structures. And so it's a great case of collaboration to the benefit of all. So we do not have any reports in camera. So we'll now move into reports of information, and that is the section 28 status report. And Tracy, would you like to highlight any of that?
Yes, thank you, to the chair. I just wanted to highlight that there has been some additional details provided on outstanding permits. Jenna's able to respond to any questions you have from the report. And of course, this is kind of an evolving process as, you know, typically these reports, they're in a format that Conservation Ontario utilizes for annual reporting, and kind of that format, as you see today, is what's used to report back to Conservation Ontario, and then Conservation Ontario takes that information to provide a broader picture of what's happening throughout the province and inform and advocate for conservation authorities in this way. Jenna has anything else you'd like to add or answer any questions that you may have?
Sandy, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move receipt of the report, but I'd also like to add an amendment. The representatives from the City of London had a request for some additional information. And I'd like the second part of this motion to be the staff be asked to consider additional reporting on applications received but not completed and report back to this board by the end of Q2. I've discussed this with Jenna and she was.
Well, I'll just ask for a seconder of the motion. Jim, please. Thank you. Sorry.
Yep. And all I was going to say is I've had an email back and forth with Jenna on this, and she was comfortable with this addition to the recommendation.
Excellent. We have a mover and a second for the motion on the floor. Is everybody comfortable and understand the motion? Is there discussion on the motion? Always helpful to have any information that's going to be helpful to the public or the board. So completely in favor of that. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Very much. And we will now move on to 8.2, which is the first quarter financial update. Tracy, please.
Yeah, Christine's here to answer any specific questions. I just point out that, yeah, it's always a little bit of an awkward time in the year. We tend to be more of a later in the year spenders as the seasons get underway and the campgrounds are operational. So just wanted to point that out and advise that questions can be directed to Christine.
Excellent. Are there any questions, board for the board? Oh, Christine.
I have to point out an error.
Okay.
Spotted yesterday. Last page, statement. Bottom note says budgeted 2022 deficit is 494. That's 2023. Can't keep track of what year I'm in.
Okay. Excellent.
Yeah. It's terrible.
We had a staff, just two questions. I know at the City of London, there was some discussion about targets for the multi-year budget. And has the city been in touch with you or vice versa about working that out for our budgets?
Tracy, you're in touch with them more than I am.
Yes, through the chair. We have been working with the City of London staff on both their strategic plan and multi-year budget processes. We haven't had a specific target as of yet established, but we have been looking at order of magnitude costing for implementation of the strategic plan objectives. If council decides what to fund, I know that's a challenge, knowing the state of the financial burden really right now. But then also working alongside that with providing some estimates on what we anticipate our baseline costs to be. So to answer your question, no specific target has been established as of yet, but I'm sure there's more on that to come as city and council work through some of those deliberations.
The second question, Mr. Chair, to Christine, any other positive or negative surprises on the horizon that you see right now? And year to date, is it as expected, except for the positive news on insurance costs?
No, at this point, it's kind of early in the year to make too much long-term forecast before the end of the year. The park reservations are good, steady. That's a quarter of our business, so that's always good news. And we are entering our 2-year budget period now. So we are working on our 2024 and 2025 budgets in anticipation of helping out the city with their longer term plans as well. So we're about 6 months early on that, which is a good thing.
So speaking of 2024, how are we in Conservation Ontario, et cetera, the government moving forward on recrafting our budget to take into account category 1, 2, and 3?
We are crafting it as we speak.
Excellent. Any further questions? Seeing none, can I have a mover to receive the report, please? Skylar, seconder, Debbie, please, you, discussion? I think that this budget, obviously, with most budgets, it's not equal throughout the year, and I think we see that. And thank you for the update, and we'll continue to go throughout the year to see how that progresses, but it's looking good so far. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Item 8.3 is April for your information. Certainly a busy month with lots of activities that are happening, and that's just going to continue more and more as we get into the busy season when everybody wants to get out, enjoy things, and do the work that's needed to move the authority forward. So is there a mover to move the report as information, please? Mark, please, seconder. Tyler, thank you. Discussion. Sorry, before I do that, is there anything you'd like to highlight from the report, Tracy?
So again, I just encourage the members to provide any feedback. This is a newer format that we've had. We've had some great comments already, but if there's any improvements that you'd like to suggest, we'd be happy to hear them.
I would encourage you to share it with all your fellow councillors. I did with mine, and they're good uptake on subscribing, so that way they can keep up to date on all the good news. So anything, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. We'll now take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back for the presentation of the conservation award. We'll return at 11:20, please. Your stuff is gone.
Yeah.
Make sure.
Everywhere at once.
Yeah, that we have as well.
Excellent. We will move on with our meeting today.
He has this.
I hope I'm not that loud in person.
Oh my gosh, that's how you're on YouTube.
Oh, excellent. That's why it's better to be here in person. We'll move on with our meeting. Next, we get to have a presentation of a conservation award, 9.1, the Kayla Berger Stewardship Award to Ruth and Mike John. This conservation award is presented to a watershed resident. I'm gonna head up to the lectern here. So yes, this conservation award is presented to a watershed resident with passion and understanding of the conservation needs in their area and desire to take action. The recipient demonstrates exceptional stewardship in protecting and improving the natural environment on their property and public land. And this time, the award is going to be presented to Ruth and Mike John. I'd like to call upon Scott, Tracy, and she will introduce Scott Gilmore.
Thank you, Brian. And yes, we recognize that Ruth and Mike don't really like the attention. We've heard that they've been kind of not wanting the big fuss, but we really wanted to show our appreciation for all the work that they've done in their mill pond efforts. And there's going to be a lot more discussion about everything that they've done for the turtles and to support Upper Thames programming, which really helps the environment for the Thames entirety. I also wanted to introduce Kayla's parents. We're fortunate enough to have them here today, Wendy and Dave, And I've invited Wendy to come up and say a few words about Kayla as well.
Oh, no, go ahead.
You're in.
Oh, we got a try.
Hi, I'm Wendy Berger and my husband is Dave. And she texted me or emailed and said, do you want to say a few words? Whale. I was like, I don't know what to say, but I do have a few stories. She did like her trees, and when she started liking trees, at one time, Dave and I were both into Girl Guides and scouting, and Kayla started and the son started. I believe she was in public school, about grades 6 and 7. Her birthday's in February. What is mom gonna do with a bunch of girls? There was, I think, 11. Again, in the winter, adventurous people as we are, I told all the moms, pack for winter, bring a snack, knapsack, and we went for a hike down a trail. Back of our house, there's abandoned railway. It goes about a kilometer into Crown land. So I took all these girls and went back into the bush. We made a shelter. There was a fallen tree, and then I told them to line up against the fallen tree to make a shelter. So we ended up having a snack. And dear Kayla, with her adventurous ideas with trees, had to go pee. So she made an outhouse just beyond Kayla, where she was. But eventually, once that was done, we went home. A few days later, the neighbor was concerned about the shelter on the Crown land. Have you seen these? Was it hunters or so? No, it was just us killing their ideas. Again, back in the trees. So also, there are 6 trees in memory of Kayla, 2 here at Upper Thames, and there's about 4 at home. About 4 at home as well. And that neighbor has planted his own red maple with a bench on his property. But where it is situated, he's got a piece of property where the house is, and then behind that railway track, he has another 50 acres. So he had put the red maple way out the back, and it also has a bench. Very lovely to sit at and enjoy the sunshine or the sunsets. Thank you.
And I wanted to welcome Scott to come up here too. Linda, maybe not. Linda Smith, I don't think so. She was hoping to get here, but had a sick child at home. So I'll invite Scott to give the introduction to our video today.
First, actually, I'd just like to say something to Kayla's parents. I didn't work with Kayla, but when she worked here, I was her canoe instructor. So I teach UTRCA, Ontario Recreational Canoe and Kayak Association training. And I train a lot of people every year. And unless it's my crew, I don't always remember everybody. But Kayla 100% stuck out in my mind. 2 quick little mentions about this. There was a black-crowned night heron, which is a pretty rare bird in this area, especially in the spring. And so I told everyone there's a juvenile black-crowned night heron. This is an extremely exciting bird to see. So she gets with her partner and they paddle over as awkwardly as they could because they hadn't learned how to paddle yet. And she gets there and she's like, well, you said it's a cool bird, huh? And I'm like, well, yeah. She's like, it's much less impressive than you made it out to be because it was a juvenile. So very brown and drab. And so right there, I knew that she had a little bit of fire in her and a sarcastic tone, and I loved it. Soon after, we were doing canoe rescue, and she was in the water covered in aquatic plants. And she just looks up to me and says, are you kidding me? So she really stuck in my mind as someone who was funny. She got everyone laughing. She had a lot of character to her, and so I really remember her. And I have her card that I made out for her ORCA certification, and I was never able to give it to her. The least I could do is give it to you. I couldn't get rid of it. I've had it for all these years since 2019. It's a small memory, but I don't know if it's something you might want.
Thank you. I'll put it on my camp blanket.
Absolutely.
Still a girl, guys.
So my entire life, I've always been drawn to meaning. Everything has to have meaning. Without meaning, I have no interest in it. And that's why, you know, there's so much meaning behind the Kayla Berger Award, between.
I was just gonna comment on this canoeing. She never liked swimming.
I figured that out very quickly. So yeah, there's meaning behind the award, the individual, that the namesake of this award, and the recipients of this award. There's so much meaning. Many years ago, we had our incubators in our storage compound area, and I had been contacted by this woman who I didn't know before. I found out it was Ruth later. Had a lot of concern about turtles and the issues impacting turtles in the Dorchester area. And so I remember meeting with her for the first time. And I think everyone probably knows when you meet someone that has true character, true care, true concern, it comes out of them in every way possible through how they speak with you, how they act, and their concerns, their interests. And within 10 minutes, I felt like I'd known Ruth for years. And it was probably, I don't know, maybe a few months after, you know, we talk about what was going on with the egg incubation of the turtles, and I'd helped Ruth out with some of that. And she said, well, we want to do more. We see that there's an issue. We see that there's a problem. And excuse me, my husband and I want to do more. So over the years, we began to talk. Sorry, I got a frog in my throat. A turtle in my throat. And we got to know each other very well. And I remember actually after the first visit going home to my wife, and I said, I met this amazing woman who's originally from South Africa. And she's like, how do you know she's from South Africa? I'm like, she says, yeah, a lot. And I thought that was the best. So, and this became a reoccurring theme. So everyone in my crew always loved when Ruth came in. One, she was kind to everyone, generous, interested in all the things we were interested in. And for the rest of the day, after Ruth left, every response to everything was yeah. So we just thought it was great. But soon after we met Mike as well, her husband, and he had the same interests, the same concern, the same personality that just oozed kindness and concern for everyone around them. And little bit by little bit, I got to know Ruth and Mike in more than just protecting a few turtle eggs here and there. And I shouldn't say a few, they would collect hundreds and hundreds, and they're now on my permits as part of the turtle team. But they also have a great concern for their community, for their neighborhood, for their neighbors, for the broader natural world. And all of this really shows you the type of person they are. You know, I think if we care about our backyard, whether we put a little brush pile, whether we are creating, you know, a pollinator area in their front garden, or the hop trees that they grow for butterflies, you know, these little things show the character of someone. It shows that they care about things on their yard. It shows that what is cared about on their yard is a broader interest in the natural world around them, and how that adjacent natural area, which is Dorchester Mill Pond, plays into their concern, and how Dorchester Mill Pond plays into the larger aspect of our natural communities. And if you were to talk to anyone who's involved with the Dorchester Mill Pond Committee, I know that they would say Mike and Ruth are the reason that they are there, or one of the reasons that they're there. They have spawned, they have created this unique community of people who care greatly about their neighborhood, about their natural area. It's so rare to find someone who cares for more than, you know, just something that's useful to them, and that spreads that joy and that interest and that care. So long after, you know, Ruth and Mike move to Hawaii or wherever they may end up in the next 40 years, because you guys are going to live forever, there are going to be people that take over what they've started. And I've met people that talk so highly of Ruth and Mike. And if you talk to anyone in my crew, they talk so highly of Ruth and Mike. If you hear me at any event that Dorchester Mill Pond gets brought up, I talk so highly of Ruth and Mike. They've become local naturalists. They've become great community members. And beyond that, they become good friends of mine. And I can't say enough amazing things about what they've done. Their time digging up soft shell eggs in the field in 35-degree heat and smiling and laughing the entire time. Sitting at a roadside at 11 at night, digging up snapping turtle eggs that would otherwise be crushed. And for what they've done for the Mill Pond Committee, for natural habitats through Linda's work, who can't be here today. I know she has 14 years of experience with Ruth and Mike. That's not 1 year. That's not a flavor of the week passing fad. That's dedication to their local ecosystem, to their community, and to the broader natural world that we know it. So I'm happy to say that they are well deserving of this award. And if anyone asks if I agree, yeah. So there's going to be a video that we put together to showcase some of our interest in what you've done and what you've been able to bring toward the watershed to our local natural community.
It's been a blessing and a gift to work alongside Ruth and Mike for many years. They're strong local advocates for environmental issues and ecological projects. They were strong members of the Dorchester Watershed Action Committee, where they were planting trees and wildflowers with students and doing other environmental projects across Dorchester. And they've been involved with the Dorchester Mill Pond Committee for many years. With the Dorchester Mill Pond Committee, they're involved with planting wildflowers around the mill pond, planting trees, running community events to help people understand more about the mill pond, and also helping plan the trails that go around. They're also really involved in tree planting, not just around the mill pond, but across the watershed. They've planted trees at the high school nearby and went out to water them on their own with a wagon and a hose. They have a lot of passion for wildflowers. Their own property is all native wildflowers, and they love taking people on tours to show them how other people can plant wildflowers as well. Mike and Ruth have also been really involved in the CocoRez project. This is a community science rain gauge program where they go out every morning before 9 a.m. and measure the rainfall from the previous evening. They've barely missed a day, and they're very, very excited about this project. They're also very involved with species at risk and protecting turtles. They're not only looking for turtle nests, but are actively involved in releasing turtles in the mill pond, and have taken my children out and exposed them to releasing turtles and how great that is.
I nominated Mike and Ruth because of their dedication to the environment. I'd known about them through word of mouth from other people at the Conservation Authority for a lot of the work that they've been doing, whether it was tree planting, working with native flowers, working with community groups. But for me, it was the work that they wanted to do to help conserve some of our species at risk, and more specifically our turtles at risk. I started meeting with Ruth to protect eggs from the Dorchester area, and it was Ruth's enthusiasm that drew me in immediately. And soon after I met Mike, they ended up doing so much for turtles in our watershed that it was pretty clear that these are people I wanted to have in my turtle team or my species at risk team. And it wasn't long before Ruth and Mike were joining me in the field looking for soft-shell turtle eggs. They have also spent countless days searching for nests at risk in their community. And again, we've built this great partnership over a long period of time. And more than that, they've become like family again to our turtle team. They have contacted government officials, conservation authority staff, local community members to push forward to try and protect lands for animals to nest and carry out their daily activities. And again, it's this dedication that influences other people. And so I always say that the best way to influence someone is to lead by example, and that's exactly what Mike and Ruth have done. Anyone who meets Ruth and Mike will immediately notice how kind they are. I think one of the biggest things when it comes to environmental work and bringing people together is kindness, and having people that you know, can draw in others, and that's exactly what Ruth and Mike can do. You know, maybe I gush over them a little bit too much, but once people meet them, they realize why. And again, you know, incredible members of our environmental community here in the Upper Thames River watershed and beyond. So you know, thanks again, Ruth and Mike. You're the best.
Congratulations, Ruth and Mike. You're so deserving of this award, and I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside you.
This is the mecca of networking.
Scott, would you like to come up and help present the award? I'll invite Ruth and Mike up to receive the award. Certainly on behalf of the board and the authority and staff, as well as the greater watershed community, I certainly am very proud to be able to present this award to you for your work you've done. And I thank Scott very much for nomination.
Congratulations.
Let's say a few words.
Ruth wouldn't, but
Say to the microphone.
well, I know I've got quite a loud voice. I'd like to thank you for all those kind words. I find it a little embarrassing to listen to that, but we feel both honored and touched actually to get this award. Sorry. We just are so glad that the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority is here, and organizations like yours looking after the environment. And we feel honored to be able to work with you guys. I'm just sorry about that.
This shows your concern, your care. This is why you get this award. If you didn't care as much as you do.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, of course, we have to do a picture.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, our next item is only notice of motions. That's not that exciting. I haven't seen any come forward. Does anybody have a notice of motion? Seeing none, we'll go to the chair's comments. And we note that Tracy and I were able to attend the Conservation Ontario AGM on April 3rd. There was a new chair of the Conservation Ontario, is the mayor of Guelph Emarosa Township, Chris White. He's also the chair of the Grand River Conservation Authority. He was just down the road. He's been a member of GRCA board since 2014. In his 5th term as mayor and past chair of Roma and AMO. So he has a lot of experience representing the interest of everyone. And so we make sure that we're very excited to have him at the helm. It was a very busy day. There was a lot of things accomplished at that meeting. And of course, I'm sure Tracy will touch on it, but there's also lots of work to do at the staff level as well through that. I would encourage members to attend the VIP day of the Middlesex London Children's Water Festival on Wednesday, May 10th, 2023, beginning at 10:30. This year, we've had the greatest number of students on site for the sign up to be on site for the festival. So it's great to see everybody coming back out and wanting to participate, especially after the pandemic, and to be able to have those events put on by the team. I will mention as well, I'm sure everybody saw since our last meeting that the province has released some new provincial policy statements through the ERO process and through Bill 97. So staff will be working with Conservation Authority on that, or Conservation Ontario, as well as I'm sure all the municipal level planning departments are as well, to try to provide comments and understand those proposed changes. Haven't seen any section 28 regulations come out as yet, but those are pending as well. So seems to be Friday. We don't have a long weekend coming up.
Yeah.
So we have Victoria Day. So But it's always fun to check every Friday on the URO website. You never know what you're gonna see. So that'll keep going until I don't know when. Are there any members' comments? Mine. Seeing none, excellent. I will now turn to the general manager's comments, please.
Thank you, Brian, through you. Just a few reminders. In the May meeting will be a short meeting followed by a tour where we are planning to keep you a little bit longer than we traditionally would. So mark that on your calendars because there is no Zoom option for that. You will have received today as well a package that contains our park pass. And that is for our members to go out for the day and enjoy our parks and our campgrounds. And then certainly encourage you to go and check them out. As well, in the package includes the Conservation Ontario Parks Pass. There's some instructions in there as well that speak to which areas that park pass is grant you access to. There's a few parks that use now automated gates and such, so there's a bit of a process to use that if it is effective. There are a few areas that it is not good for. Just raise that for you as well. I mentioned we are expecting some more comments to be provided on the most recent ERO postings. Conservation Ontario is coordinating the comments, so that'll keep Jenna and her group busy compiling comments on the changes that we've seen so far. And on the theme of awards today and recognitions, I would say, we wanted to recognize our Human Resources Coordinator, Sharon. Now Sharon's back there in the back. She has actually been with the authority since 1977, starting as a summer student and managing kind of the summer student program at the time. So, and just think back at that time, I think she was saying 36 summer students were hired that you were responsible for. So that's quite a crew. But I'd invite Teresa forward to provide a presentation, and as well we have heard from the board members.
We're gonna have a little do for Sharon on Monday, but we didn't want, we knew the members wanted to say something to you themselves. Sharon, how many, 43 years of yeah, altogether, if you count it all up. And I haven't worked here that long.
I've been aboard.
A few months. But yeah, we just wanted to make sure that you've got some official recognition of the board.
Absolutely, Sharon. I can't even begin to thank you for your years of dedication, the knowledge that you've bestowed upon everybody who's come here, and the impact that you've had on this organization. And I truly want to wish you the best of retirement and enjoy your last opening day. You're always welcome back on May 1st. I know there's a story behind that, and maybe like to share that because it's something of a. I almost wish it happened, but I'm from a customer service perspective. I'm glad it hasn't.
There used to be a big deal in that the trailers would be lined up. They didn't actually let them in the park until opening day, so they would be lined up out to Clark Road. So as we're coming into work before the park, we had to drive around them, and then we'd sit in our offices and wave at them all. It's the parade of trailers came in. They don't do that now, they let them in earlier, but it's going to be finished on April 28th. It's opening day, and drive in here on May 1st. So Teresa said they're going to have something for me on May 1st. Perfect. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Sharon.
Excellent. Anything else, Tracy?
Just a reminder that we'll have a light lunch coming in, and again, an opportunity for our awards recipients to mingle a little bit too.
Excellent. Yeah. Yeah, we'll have a finance and audit committee following this. Or just call for a move for adjournment. Thank you for everybody. It was a great discussion. I love all the questions coming from when we do have our orientation sessions, it shows that everybody's very interested. And there's lots to learn. Of course, it doesn't matter how long you've been with the authority or any organization. You learn something every time. And so I thank staff for sharing that knowledge. We sometimes forget how complicated things are and all the work that has to go into making sure that happens. So again, thank you to the board. I've been really impressed with the amount of the quality questions and the amount of questions coming from the board, and the willingness to learn and be a part. So thank you for that. And with that, can I ask for a motion to adjourn? Dean, please. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.